Good evening. How are we? In traditional Linden and Canopy fashion, we are running 20 minutes. That's quite good for us. 20 minutes late. Generally, when we run these nights, we don't start for a half hour afterwards, so 20 minutes is good.
Is that the Canopy just there?
That is the Canopy. For those of you who don't know what Canopy is, we've been running for about a year, and we're trying to be a fresh expression of church. Ooh, what does that mean? Who knows? We're fresh. Is that one of your words?
No, it isn't.
So we're trying to meet and talk about Christian and what are we doing? My head's gone. We're trying to talk about Christian issues in a relaxed environment where people who don't normally go to church can easily engage. It's aimed at 18 to 30s, and you all look like you fit that tonight. So tonight we've got a bit of a special night. The second Sunday of every month, which is tonight, is a Headspace night, where we debate usually with a panel and discuss current world affairs. But tonight we've got the wonderful Gerard Kelly.
I am the panel.
You are the panel tonight, Gerard. Let's see what it says about you on the back of your book. Gerard Kelly is the co-founder with his wife Chrissy of the Bless Network.
Good.
Yeah.
Yes, Bless. Woo! I'm modelling some clothing tonight of Bless.
It's a clothing company.
It's not a clothing company. He has published 12 books, including this one called Twittergies, which I'm sure you can buy tonight, including 2 poetry collections. His poems have been featured on BBC Radio and television and are widely used in church services and other events around the world. Gerard lives in Normandy, France, where Bless are establishing a missional community. There you go.
It's all true.
It's all true. Gerard, over to you.
Oh, thank you. Grand. Well, hello. This is nice. I'm old enough to remember the 70s when we had coffee bars. It's like a big flashback. I knew it would come round again if we went there long enough. It always does, doesn't it, really? Great, good to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That was just you I was addressing that to, not the rest of the people, because I knew it was your idea originally that you campaigned for this to happen. Okay, we wanted to think a little bit about some of the things that are defining, that are shaping the culture we live in, and therefore will shape the kinds of churches that will prosper and thrive in that culture. But I also want to do a couple of poems. This is a kind of a blessing, really, so I'll read this as a sort of blessing over us as we start this little journey together. I better get out of the way of the screen, those of you who want to follow it. May God, in whose furnace faith is forged, in whose being beauty breathes, from whose dawning darkness flees, shine on you. May the Father, whose love for you beats with a rhythm time itself can't stop, whose presence in your exile is the promise of home, whose certainties are deeper than the cellars of your city, whose breath is life, breathe on you. May the Son, whose journey is a mirror of your own, who has journeyed into darkness to find a key to your prison, who has dived the deepest oceans to find pearls for your wisdom, who has looked into your heart and found a beauty worth the battle, who has written your name on a white stone carved in secret, hold you. May the Spirit, who has waited millennia to fill you, who shaped the word that moved the wind of the morning that conceived you, who holds the earth on which you stand as an artist holds a candle, who fully knows you, wholly own you. So may God, the faithful Father, God, the scarred Son, God, the sculpting Spirit, journey with you. And one of the things that shapes what we do in mission these days is the consciousness that we are part of this story of God, that the story of God is bigger than us, it's bigger than our generation. It began millennia before we were born, and it will extend beyond our lives. And the story of God is big enough to give us all a place in security. But the great miracle of God's story is that He makes each of our lives, offers to make each of our lives significant. I'm part of Bless, as young Dan said. Did you like that, young Dan? I'll say it's probably about the last time I'll feel able to say that. Because you can't go on forever saying young Dan, can you? Eventually you've got to acknowledge that he is in fact middle-aged. So, just for tonight, thank you, young Dan, for all your hard work, and may your hair one day return. So, Bless Network is an agency that engages in mission on mainland Europe, and really it's all about trying to give people, a lot of people in your kind of age group, an opportunity to engage in mission. It's about developing a missional spirituality. We're based in France, in this lovely place, which has decided not to click for some reason. Oh, interesting. No, there it is. Now it's going to click about 20 times, isn't it? Nope. This is a former cider farm in the Normandy countryside, where some of you have been to visit. And very beautiful. And there are 3 families now living there. And we host weekends and training sessions and a whole bunch of stuff. And have interns living for a longer period, and we also connect with churches in various parts of Europe. There's a lovely, you can't see it because it's sort of right in this corner, but there's a great prayer room in the corner of this complex, and we, as a community, we kind of live a rhythm of prayer and seek out of that to bless and strengthen others. Basic idea behind Bless is that we create this kind of 3-way partnership, take volunteers, usually young adults, but we'll have anyone really, to be honest. Volunteers, connect them up with a local church and enable them in partnership with that local church to impact communities. And our idea, our sense is that God will bring blessing to each of those. So the participants themselves grow and receive blessing through doing this. The churches are encouraged and stimulated in their mission, and the local communities are also blessed. And we've got that happening with partnerships in, like I said, Croatia, I think I did, Germany, France, Spain, the Netherlands. We're seeing real fruit in terms of people discovering their place in God's mission through engaging with these different partnerships. Here's a little, I think, piece of video. This will tell you a little bit more about it.
My name is Matt, I'm 27.
My name is Imogen, I'm 20 years old.
My name's Ches, I'm 25 and I'm from Stourbridge.
I'm Kate, I'm 27 years old and I'm from Biskupiec in Poland.
My name's Hannah, I'm 22 and I've just come back from Slavonski Brod.
I just came back from 3 weeks in Slavonski Brod, Croatia.
So I live at Bethany, which is Bless's missional training centre in Normandy, France. It's an old cider farm, and I live here with my wife and my daughter, and we host and train young people and students, and we send them out across mainland Europe to work with local churches, to serve them and to see more of God's kingdom breaking out in places like Slavonski Brod, Lisieux and Amsterdam.
What I learned this year on mission was that we need to speak blessing over a place and its people. While worshipping by the river in Croatia, we really focus on that, just speaking out blessing to people and to the place that we were in. And it's something I'm going to take away with me.
Blessed in 3 words: relationships, journey, and prayer.
Family, / community, food, and prayer.
Prayer, mission and growing my own veg.
Family, farming and outdoor showers.
Blessed is a really cool place. There's a really good sense of community and there's always loads of people hanging around who will want to pray for you and talk to you.
Okay, that's a little bit about Bless, and at the heart of this thing, I'm 53 this year. Shock, horror.
Hard to believe.
I know. It is hard to believe, isn't it, really? So sexy and in his 50s. It's amazing, isn't it? It's extraordinary. I'm 53 this year. For me, it's been an incredible journey, and it is a privilege to hang out with a whole bunch of people who are much younger than that. And through talking with them, we have a lot of conversation. One of our commitments with Bethany, the community, is that meals take a long time to prepare and a long time to eat. We call it slow food. We think fast food is a sin and offends the heart of God. And we take time over food and time over meals, which creates space for conversation. So we spend a lot of our time talking with people. When people come for a weekend, we do some program and we do some praying, but we also create space around conversation. And in those conversations, I am learning. I've got to tell you, the last couple of years, I've learned more about what's going on in the world just by having conversation and listening to the sorts of questions people ask than I'd learned previously through reading books and what have you. It's been a fascinating journey. And part of our passion is how do we find ways to help a new generation to engage in church in a culture which is completely different from what went before. And how do we help a new generation to develop models of church that make sense in their culture, not to simply take an old model and say, well, we'll just keep doing that, but to find new ways. We are passionately committed to church. We're committed to local church. We love the idea of being part of church. But we're recognising increasingly with the people we talk to, a lot of people are struggling to maintain commitment to church and to work out what the heck that means. So we're saying, well, maybe there are ways in which we can develop fresh expressions. We can develop models of church that enable people to really commit. We want people to maintain commitment to church. We want people to have the benefit of belonging to this amazing family of God, which we really believe in. But it's taking us, it takes effort and time to really think through what that might mean. So I want to talk a little bit this evening about some of the things we're learning about the culture we live in, some of these emerging kind of parameters of culture, and then what that might mean for the kind of churches we need to create. While I'm doing this, there are, upon these tables spread about this room, these pieces of paper that say on them, question. So please feel free, if there's something you want to bring back later as a question, feel free to write down stuff, make notes, and then we can use those later. Having said that, if the question you need to ask is so desperate that you want an answer right away, then interrupt me, because that'll be a lot more fun. So do feel free. If you've got some questions that are like, if you think, basically, if you're sitting there thinking, that makes no sense at all, he's talking complete rubbish, then just say so, and we'll have a bit of a banter, because that'd be fun. So I don't mind being interrupted if that's what you want to do. But if you want to write down questions and we'll talk about them afterwards, that'd be really, really good. This slide, or this picture, is a poster from the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which is called MoMA, Museum of Modern Art. And their kind of internal communications department, a couple of years ago, I think this is still happening actually, initiated a campaign. They were asked to come up with a campaign to persuade visitors to the art gallery. It's a big modern art museum in New York. To persuade visitors to the museum to actually join the kind of Friends thing, to join the museum, because they wanted people to become part of it. So the campaign was called Belong, and it was around this concept of belonging to something. And what they did with these words was they put together a bunch of words that they considered, they thought these words described their museum, but they also think these words describe the kind of thing that people might want to belong to. So the campaign was likely, do you want to belong to something that is brilliant, electrifying, radical, curious, etc., etc., etc. And that's what the museum kind of represented. And they put these posters up around the place, and then they did lots of little tricks with belonging. You belong here, and that's the place you can join. Belong to something. They even have one of the words was introspective, so they wrote belong to something introspective in backwards writing on the mirrors in the toilets, because that's how clever these people are. Funky, isn't it, really? And a friend of mine, John Renfrew, was travelling in the States, and he saw this, and he brought back some pictures for me, because he said, isn't it interesting? It's a really interesting exercise to ask yourself how many of these words describe your experience of church. Interesting / depressing. Because some of them do, and that's great when they do, but some of them don't. And it gives us a really interesting question. What kind of movement, what kind of family, what kind of community do people want to belong to in our culture? What are the things that can happen that encourage people to belong? And so we're going to take 6 words, and six words that I think are increasingly describing the kind of thing that people want to belong to. And I've read stuff, I do a lot of reading obviously, and there's a stuff around the moment, people say, people in postmodern culture don't want to belong anymore. And there's this big thing, all the political parties are complaining because nobody will join, all the clubs are complaining because nobody will join. And I actually think it's not because people don't want to belong, it's because people don't want to belong to really boring organisations. People don't want to belong. If you're asked to sign your name to something where you know, like a political party, where you know that the belonging is actually going to be meaningless other than the fact that they will use your name to leverage something. So they will say, oh, this person belongs to us, and that, but not give you anything in return, then you say no. And unfortunately, for some people, that's exactly what belonging to the church feels like. You want my name so that you can say that I belong, but it's not actually an engagement that's meaningful. So I don't think we live in a culture where people don't want to belong. In fact, I think we live in a culture where people are desperate to belong to stuff. I think we live in a culture where we're desperate to try and create meaningful community. But as churches, we have failed to understand what kind of things people want to belong to. So 6 words, these are 6 words that have kind of emerged in these conversations we've been having at Bethany, kind of emerged from some of the stuff people are saying to us that I think are shaping the sense of what people want to belong to. The first word is sustainable, which is now going to Exeter. Yeah. Sustainable, XXX. And because people want to belong to something that is sustainable, living for the long haul, respecting limitations, seeking renewable resources. And the really interesting thing about our current culture, like I said, I'm 53 this year, I feel very old. When I was at school, I was part of the generation that kind of first discovered, or was first told, that we're actually screwing up the world and that the environment's going to pot and that we're all going to die. So we were told that as a kind of new discovery. I actually remember the day, I can still remember exactly the day in a geography lesson when we sat there and we were shown a photograph of the Amazonian rainforest, and we were told that some people were building bulldozing a mile-wide strip through this rainforest in order to put a road, and if they didn't stop, eventually we would all stop breathing. That was the basic premise kind of thing. But I remember being so shocked by that. So there was a generation that discovered difficulties in the environment, but we now have a generation that has grown up knowing that from the very beginning. So some of you in this room have grown up and you've never lived in a world in which that wasn't the case. So, and what's happened, which is a really interesting thing, is that what that's meant is that the concept of sustainability, instead of just being something to do with the environment, has become a kind of paradigm for the way we live our lives. So people are asking for sustainability in a whole bunch of areas. So they're beginning to say, not just what does it look like to be sustainable in the environment, but what does a sustainable lifestyle look like? And we're discovering people asking us, what does sustainable mission look like? What is a sustainable model of church? What is sustainable spirituality? Let me give you 2 or 3 examples of that. In the mission situation, back in the day, when some of us in this room, who are no longer young, were young, a mission was something you did every year or 2, and it involved putting together enormous amounts of resources, gathering all the money, and paying for some team to come in, or theatre group, or big hit preacher, or whatever. And then everybody would make this enormous effort for a short period of time to try and persuade lots and lots of people to be Christians. And then the mission was over and we'd get on with doing some other things. Very intensive, very kind of focused time. And it was like a kind of peak in the life of the church. And our churches would sort of go along like this, and then they would peak. And we still have spirituality that works like that. Some people experience things like Soul Survivor in that way. They have a spirituality that is very flat, and then it goes woo, and then it goes back down again for a while. And we are hearing a lot of people saying, we can't live like that. We can't live in this way that we go flat and then suddenly active and then flat. What we need is a spirituality that's actually sustainable, that actually works. We're discovering a lot of people saying, we don't want a Sunday spirituality, we want something that makes sense 7 days a week. We want spirituality that works in our daily lives. We want a way of living sustainably with God. And I think that's fantastic. I think it's a brilliant question. Second example, a lot of the guys we're dealing with, I don't know about how this goes down in Mumbles, who knows? A lot of the guys we're dealing with are really interested in monastic stuff and the kind of some of the monastic spirituality. That's not because any of us want to sleep on a concrete bed without a blanket and be woken up at 12 o'clock at night to pray. So we don't really want to be monks at all. But we love some of the prayers and stuff, and the reason for that is because the monk in the church's history, at a time when most people focused their commitment to church on Sundays, the monks were the people who had to work out how to follow God all through the week. They were the people who had to work out what it means to live in a rhythm with God 7 days a week. And that's what people are asking. They're asking, what does it mean for me to live in a rhythm of relationship with God? What does it mean for prayer to kind of flow through my life? And we're working with a lot of people who are saying, I would rather than having big highs and low lows, I would rather have a sustained way of doing spirituality that may not be quite as high on the highs, but it won't be quite as low on the lows either, and it will work with me and travel with me. So there's real pressure on us, and I think those of us who are involved, any of you who are involved in doing church and mission and stuff, I think you will find yourself being asked over the next few years, is this sustainable? Does it work? Is church going to actually put energy into my life, or is it going to suck all the energy out of my life and leave me exhausted? Is this something that I can actually continue and work with? Is it sustainable for the long term? Does it recognise my limitations? Is it a thing that I can operate within in peace? And of course, the lovely thing about the biblical view of spirituality is it's all dependent on the Holy Spirit, who is kind of the ultimate renewable energy source. It's based on the idea that your energy is renewed. It's based on the idea that God renews you day by day by day. So there are models in Christian history that are really helpful of renewal, but we're looking for ways of being renewed in our daily lives. We're looking for real world, feet on the ground, authentic spirituality. So what makes your spirituality sustainable? What makes your experience of God sustainable? That doesn't mean there's no room for the occasional high. It doesn't mean that at all, but it means that you're not dependent on working from one high to the next, but you're actually working out day to day what your relationship with God looks like. And we do a lot of work on spiritual disciplines. We do a lot of work on what it means to really know and hear the voice of God in our daily lives. So lots of questions around what does it mean for our faith to be a sustainable commitment and for our models of church to be sustainable. Excuse me. Second word is the word social, usually followed by network, but we're just doing social at the moment. And we live in a culture which has become massively committed to networking and to being social. There's a great company in London actually who do kind of social network marketing stuff, who are just called We Are Social, which is a great expression, isn't it? We're becoming a more social community. We're recognising more connection. What does that mean? Well, there's a couple of things that are emerging for this which are absolutely brilliant and really interesting for the church, I think. One is that the community is increasingly based on human commonality. What that means is really, really simple. And those of you who are young might find it shocking that Christians didn't used to believe this. But what it means is I like you because you're a human being, not because you're a Christian. Not because you belong to my corner of the thing, not because you share all my views, but just because you're human. And what we have in common as human beings is more important than what divides us as human beings or what separates us as human beings. And people are increasingly building... Now, we're all part of all these different interlocking and overlapping networks. And a great thing that's happening is that many of us are discovering that friendship is more important than the factions we fall into. So whereas and again, some of you who are young will be shocked by this, but when some of us older ones were teenagers, we were told, do not, you may be told this as well, so, do not have friends who aren't Christians, because they will make you a sinner. And we were told and we lived in this little boxy world, and a lot of Christians, some still do, lived in this little boxy world. Christian music, Christian this, Christian that. They drove a Christian car to the Christian garage and put Christian fuel in the Christian tank. And they had Christian pictures on their walls, and they listened to Christian music, and they thought that putting the word Christian in front of something made it better. Now we've discovered it actually makes it worse. So if you think of music, for instance, music is really, really good. Christian music? Not too sure, really. But what we've got is, and I discovered this, if I talk to you about my lovely son Joe, some of you know Joe, He's 29 now, I think. How old is Joe? Yeah, I think he must be 29. And about to have a baby. That's sweet. I could show you a picture of her, actually, because we've got this weird scan thing. I don't know. Well, the scan baby thing.
They all look the same, can do that.
No, this one doesn't. I'll show you later, mate. It's very cool. They've got some new tech, but they're in Germany. They've got new technology in Germany, mate. It's not like the NHS. They've got real hospitals, you know. Anyway. And,
Questions going down.
You need any medical care?
Anyway, and Joe, I remember when Joe was about 17 or 18, and he, just for a whole load of reasons, partly because we'd been travelling, and we kind of, I don't know if any of you have ever done this, but sometimes he landed in school in Starbridge when he was about 15, and if you land in school a couple of years later than everybody else, they've all formed friendship groups, and there's nobody left to be your friend except the dross. Sorry, but that's what happened. So he got friendly with this bunch of people, half of whom later turned into heroin dealers and stuff. I mean, they were crazy people, and he really, really liked them. And what was really interesting was I discovered with Joe, as his dad, that the one thing that would make him most angry at home, and which I appreciate, was if I said things, especially as a pompous Christian, that were critical of his friends. Because these are my friends, Dad. You're not talking about statistical possibilities. You're not talking about people who may in theory exist. You are talking about my friends. And friendship became really, really important to him. More important than whether these people chose to share his faith or not. Which I thought was really, really interesting. And I've tested this out since and discovered that this is more and more true, that we are learning to be real friends to people. And the fact that someone who's been your friend for years suddenly turns around one day and says, I no longer share your faith, or I no longer want to come to a church, or I've become a Satanist, or I'm having a sex change, or whatever it is they say to you, does not mean they're no longer your friend. Which I think is brilliant. I think that's a much more godly view of friendship. But it challenges how we do church, doesn't it? Because we used to talk about people outside the church as if, if in theory you ever meet someone who doesn't agree with you, this is what you might want to say to them. But now it's like, but these are my friends already. These are the people I'm relating to. And that's changing how we think about friendship. And I think that's really good, to be honest. And I think it's changing the notion of church as some kind of separate community. And we're realising that we are all connected to each other, and we're connected to all kinds of different people. And one of the really good things to do, and I'm learning this because I'm a bit of a gobby git, so I often say the wrong thing. Never about the National Health Service, but occasionally about feelings. And I'm learning, I now get my teeth set on edge. I get really, really nervous when I hear churches talking about people who aren't present. I get really nervous when we make pronouncements about this or that group in society, this or that group in the culture, who aren't actually in the room at the time. Because I think we should always talk as if they were. So you might be part of an all-white community, but you should never talk about non-white people on the basis that they're not there. Does that make sense? You should always talk as if those people are already around the table. And that way you are much more natural when those people are around the table, if that makes sense. Whereas the worst thing that happens when a group kind of gets very closed in on itself is when somebody from outside the group is around the table, they all go, ooh, we don't know what to say now. And it's happening a lot with gay people, with churches that are very, very not gay, churches that claim they are very, very not gay. And then they go, oh my goodness, I don't know what to say, because the person next to me is not someone I'm used to talk. But we've got to learn to be human beings. We've got to learn that every human being has a story, and every story is worth hearing. It is never, ever, ever a waste of time to listen to another human being. It is always a worthwhile thing to do. So we're learning to express human friendship. And I want to say to you, actually, if you're interested in kind of Christian mission and stuff, the biggest thing you can do as a Christian to be effective in mission is learn to speak human. Learn to talk about what your faith is and what it means to you in human language. Learn to tell people the kind of things you're doing and what you're experiencing in the language of human beings, not in some weird other language, but just in the language of everyday life. Learn to connect, because the other thing we're discovering about this, which I think is fantastic, and this is a big shift, is that whereas we got used to a few years ago, or I don't know how many years ago, towards the end of the 20th century, we kind of got into this idea that nobody liked Christians. We sort of got into this idea that your friends would only be your friends if you never talked to them about faith. I don't think that's true anymore. I think if you can be really human and talk about your faith humanly, people are really up for the conversation. They don't, and they don't think you're crazy, because they're crazy as well, and that's okay. So there's a really good thing happening where if we can just be relaxed and natural about the people we are, there are really good opportunities for friendship and connection. But of course the irony of this is that what defines real friendship is that that person doesn't have to do anything to win your friendship. So you might be really, really pleased that someone you're friends with chooses to be a Christian, but that's not the basis on which you spend time with them. The basis on which you spend time with them is that you like him and they're your friend. And there's this interesting thing about learning, and the irony, of course, about unconditional love is that the people who show unconditional love are the ones whose friends become Christians. It's ironic, isn't it, really? But once we learn to just unconditionally commit to people, we discover all kinds of things. So there's something really interesting happening around relationships and connections. And of course, the other thing about the social world that's absolutely fascinating from a missions point of view. How many people are in Linden Church? Not right this minute, but generally.
100-ish.
100-ish. I thought you were going to say 100 odd, because then I could have said something about 100 odd people, but you didn't. It's a shame, isn't it, really? It's really good. So the really interesting thing is we used to, when you have a church of about 100, we used to say, oh, we just got 100 people and there's 50 million in the town and all the rest of it. Now what you say is, if you actually, you don't measure this, you don't write it down, but if it, even as a mental map, if you talk about the number of people that those 100 people are in relationship with, you only have to go to 1 degree of relationship and you're into the thousands. Go to 2 degrees of relationship, you're into the tens of thousands. It's extraordinary. So there's a really interesting thing for churches. I've always wondered this. If we're already in relationship with tens of thousands of people, why do we need to create these huge events to go and find other people? Well, there's an answer to that. We have to go and find some other people because the ones we're in relationship with don't like us very much. Because they already, but anyway, that's facetious. But it's really interesting, isn't it, that there's the whole missional thing, if it was more about friendship and humanity and sharing light, we would realise that the biggest mission field we have is people we already know. And that we're so there's something about connections and friendship, but there is also something brilliant about being committed to friendship. And that if you have said to someone, I will be your friend, that you work out what it means to maintain that commitment, even if that person's choices and their behaviour and their belief systems challenge your belief system. That once you've said to someone, I will be your friend, short of them actually pulling a knife on you and saying, no, I don't want you to be my friend, you maintain that friendship and work out what it means to be loyal and faithful to people. And again, just to finish this bit off about friendship, the most fascinating thing about this is, if you ask theologically, what is the character of God, particularly in the Old Testament, how is God revealed? The word that most reveals the character of God in the Old Testament is faithfulness. God reveals himself as faithful to the people of Israel. So when you reveal yourself as faithful to a friend, you are revealing something of the character of God to them. So there is something about learning what it means to be faithful. So we're looking for sustainable models of church. We're looking to be social and to work out what it means to be social. Okay, 2 words, that is. The third word, I have no idea what time it is, so we'll just keep going, and then if you all fall asleep, I'll stop. The third word that I think is really, really important is this word choral. I don't know if you've noticed that people are really into choirs at the moment, whether it's Glee or all that choir stuff on the BBC or whatever it is, but the whole idea of singing together. Why? Because, anybody here in a choir? Yeah, anybody here a choir leader? That'd be exciting. No, okay. What are the 2 conditions you need for a choir to really sound good? I ask you this question as someone whose voice is actually beautiful. And if only we had time, I would in fact sing to you. But since we're a bit short of time, we'll move on. So what are the 2 things you need for a choir to sound great?
Humans.
Yeah, humans. Thank you. It's always a sign. Harmony, great. And what is the other thing that goes with harmony that makes harmony wonderful?
Teamwork.
Melody?
Melody, okay, yeah. Keep going. No.
Teamwork.
Teamwork, okay. Getting there. The actual thing, I'll tell you because otherwise we're going to see. The interesting thing is, what you need is the opposite of harmony, which is difference. Because if you have a choir where everybody sings the same part, that's not harmony, it's boring. It's just an amplified version of one person singing. And what makes harmony exciting is the fact that people take different parts and yet have harmony. So the two things that make a choir sound great are difference and harmony, difference and unity. And what's interesting about that, if you read the New Testament, which I'm sure some of you do, there's this amazing thread running through the New Testament where the miracle of the church, the miracle of what God is doing, is that people who are different are hanging out together. And the people who are different are, to use my rather sentimental choir image, singing the same song. And what comes from them, what makes it beautiful, is that they are so different. So a choir full of people who all sound the same, or all sing, is really, really dull. But a choir full of people who are different and yet have harmony is fantastic. So we're learning that the best communities, the community we want to be part of, isn't the community where everybody's like us. That has a certain degree of satisfaction, but the real satisfaction is to be in a community where people are very different from us, and yet we discover what it is to live in harmony and to be on the same journey. And that's actually what the church is supposed to be. We actually went to the other extreme and said, well, wouldn't it be easier if all our churches just had some of the same people in them, because then we can all get on? And it actually isn't the case at all. So there's a really interesting challenge to us to actually develop communities where difference becomes celebrated rather than resisted, and that actually there is room for all kinds of different voices. This works in a whole number of ways. One of the ways is that worship works in a whole load of different voices. One of the things is recognizing that there are places in Scripture where our relationship with God is all about exuberance and triumph. There's other places in Scripture where it's about lament and loss. And we have all those voices. There are people who are really, really quiet, who never contribute to noisy churches, because it's never quiet enough for their voice to be heard. So there's this idea that in our life together, there are loads of different ways of reflecting who God is. And there's a place for everybody, or there should be. There's a place for everybody in this kind of choir. And if you're a really talented choir leader, you'll kind of say, it doesn't matter where you start, I can bring you into this. And I can give you your part and I can make you sing. In fact, that's not true, because some of us have really awful voices. But that's where the analogy breaks down and we pretend that that's not true. But you can be brought... So we need to have churches that celebrate difference, I believe, that celebrate diversity. Churches where unity is not achieved by sameness, but actually is discovered in exuberant diversity, that we encourage people to be different, and that we actually have ways of doing worship, kind of cycles of worship, where there's room for different people and different voices, and that there's a place for different ways of doing things, and that we recognise some of the texture and the wonder of Scripture and of the gospel in recognising the place of different people. And of course the brilliant thing about a choir that has room for everybody, the brilliant thing about a community that celebrates difference, is that you can invite people into it without them feeling that they won't fit. Because when you have a community that celebrates difference, there is nobody that doesn't fit. Because everybody adds to it, adds to the picture, and everybody has a place. And I think if we're honest, folks, those of us who've been around a while, there are too many times that we have longed for someone to be part of our church, and they have said, I don't want to be, or even if they've never said it, it's in their heads, I can't be part of your church because I just won't fit in with those people. Or we've required people to fit with us rather than actually allowing our community to grow and evolve around people, and for the vision for our community to change as different people join. The sound that we make changes. And I don't know if you've ever done this, but I love the idea of saying to someone, we would love you to come and be part of our church, because you would bring something that we don't have. You would bring a sound to what we do that isn't there yet. So actually extending our understanding of what diversity is. Now there's another one that goes with that. If we are genuinely choral, if we're listening to all the voices, then we will also become conversational in how we think about truth. Conversational in what we think truth is and who we think God is. Conversational means we make time for each other, we listen to each other's stories, and it means ultimately that the truth we proclaim is woven from the threads of 1,000 different stories. That we stop seeing truth as some absolute fixed thing over here that people come to, but we actually see it as something that is somehow dispersed amongst people. Now it's not the same as consensus, but it means that every time you listen to someone, you add to your capacity to know who God is. Every time you hear someone's story, your sense of God increases. Doesn't matter whether that person is a super Christian or not, doesn't matter who they are. Every human being carries some element of God's story in them. And every human being, in telling you their story, is useful to you in your learning. And something grows. So we've learned, like I said earlier, about us having slow meals. We've learned a lot about conversation at Bethany, and it's been so rich. And the first, I'm learning this because I'm not very good at it, but we're learning that when you realise you're talking to someone, and when you realise that they are completely different from you and totally disagree with everything you believe and have a completely different view, your first reaction isn't to start correcting them, it's to say, tell me your story. How did you come to that place? How did you make those decisions? Because their story is their story and it belongs to them and it's authentic and real, and you can validate their story without having to throw your faith in the bin. Just by saying, I want to hear who you are. And we learn from each other. And I think there's an emerging thing where we're learning to do truth conversationally rather than seeing it as something that is delivered, to learn from each other. And some of you might want to ask some questions about that in a minute, but that'd be fun. We'll do that. So conversational, learning to listen to each other, taking time for stories. This is, we have a thing within Bless that takes pictures in the future. This is in fact Dan. And
Still chasing the ladies.
Still chasing the ladies. Still on the lookout. Saying, you see what you don't understand is I'm great.
It's the same hat he wears now.
Yeah, same hat, exactly. When I say this in the future, it's only 5 years. Taking time for conversation, time to listen to each other, time to hear each other's story, validating people's stories, whether or not you think that you would have made the same choices, whether or not you share the same views, validating their story as human beings and creating spaces to listen to each other. There has to be one. I have to choose someone who is the butt of the jokes for the entire evening.
And I think it's a good choice.
I feel I've made a popular choice. Okay, two more little words that affect what's happening. This one is the word aesthetic, having to do with beauty. Partly because the culture we live in, we are now in a culture where we are growing up looking at screens and designing things from a very, very early age. And there's a sensitivity to aesthetics that we didn't used to have. Attention afforded to beauty, value derived from design. We value design and colour and beauty in a way that the previous generation didn't. And that's really, really important in thinking about church. I've had conversations with, some of you know my dear son Aaron, who is aesthetics on a stick. Because I can talk to my son Aaron, and I can try and persuade him that some church is great and he ought to go along to it. And he'll say, I just don't want to. And in the end, it'll be because they use the wrong font on their newsletter. I'm serious. And I go, well, that doesn't matter. But it matters to him because he cannot be at peace in the midst of all this ugliness. It's weird, isn't it? It's funny, isn't it? But there's this thing about becoming aesthetically sensitive. Now, and I think and obviously that sounds trivial, but it's actually really, really important because beauty is one of the attributes of God. And we've been telling people for generations that God is just, or even we've tried a bit of God is loving, but we don't know how to say to people God is beautiful. But God is beautiful, and all beauty, in my view, points to God. Everything in the world that is beautiful, in some sense, points to the God who made the world beautiful. So beauty is becoming a category of our spirituality and mission. And it's really, really important to reflect that, because if we are clumsy with... So, for instance, just to use an analogy, if you found a Christian community that was being cruel to its children, you wouldn't want to join that community, because cruelty is something you don't accept. Well, we've now got a generation that feel a bit like that about ugliness. Not ugly people, because that's okay, we're all right. But about not taking seriously beauty. That if you can be trivial and cavalier with beauty and just ignore the beauty of things, that points to an insensitivity that people struggle with. So there's a really interesting shift in terms of a generation that want aesthetics to be at the front instead of down the list. I want aesthetics to be important. You might have heard, I don't know if anybody ever saw the Steve Jobs commencement address that Steve Jobs made at Stanford University about 8 years ago, and it was actually after he just had a liver transplant, and he thought he was going to die that time, and then he kind of came back, not from the dead, from the operating theatre. And he survived due to some incredibly expensive medical treatment that nobody else could afford. Anyway, and he talked to these students about having sort of faced death and stuff, and that was interesting. And he told this brilliant story, I thought it was absolutely fascinating, to do with fonts, about the fact that when he dropped out, Steve, you know who Steve Jobs is? Yeah, sorry, I'm not being stupid, am I? Good, thank you. Steve Jobs actually dropped out of university because he couldn't be bothered with it all, and he wanted to go and do something more interesting. But when he dropped out of his course, the term wasn't quite finished, and he still had he paid some fees and stuff. So they said, well, you can just hang around the university and do a few extra, what they call electives, just kind of extra courses. And he took a course in calligraphy, that is, how to make beautiful letters. And he learned how to make beautiful letters. So when letters, not lettuce, letters. God makes beautiful letters, doesn't he? He learned how to do calligraphy and how to make letters beautiful. So when he came to design the first operating system for Macintosh computers, instead of just having those little, well, those of you, some of you don't remember these, but we used to have letters made of little dots, and they looked really ugly. They looked like a computer had written them. He worked out how to program the computer to make good fonts. And because of it, what he says in the commencement address is really funny, is that's why your Mac computer has beautiful fonts on it. And then he says, and since Windows is just a copy of Mac, they have them too. But a whole because the previous generation didn't know what a font was. It was something you baptised your babies in the church. Seriously. What's a font, for goodness sake? And we had typewriters that didn't give you any choice. And then we had really revolutionary typewriters that gave you two choices, italic and something else. But suddenly we've got these hundreds, and there are people. I had a guy in my church in Amsterdam who was doing a master's degree in how to design fonts. It was amazing. You have these people spending hours and hours and hours making letters look beautiful, because our world, our culture, is becoming more sensitive to questions of design and beauty and balance. And there's a lot we can do as Christian people, as churches, as communities, to pay attention to that, and to let those within our community who understand beauty express that, to let our worship be impacted by beauty, to let our prayer life be impacted by beauty, to let the things we do be impacted by beauty. And then the last one, of my 6 words, is entrepreneurial, starting things. We have a culture that is really, really keen on starting things. Do, start, make, the desire for direct action, the honouring of those who start something. Let me just show you the faces of some of the people who, for better or worse, have become massive heroes in our culture in recent years. Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, how do you say that? Amazon man, anyway. Doesn't he employ half of Swansea, you know? I came past, that is a massive warehouse. And there's hundreds of them in Europe. It's unbelievable. Anyway, the guy who founded Amazon. And Larry and Sergey from Google. And these people are our heroes because we love this legend, these myths of the fact that they all started with nothing. They all came up with an idea that at the beginning was a very, very small idea, and then it mushroomed into these huge things that we have today. Now, it's not that has never happened before in history. That happened in the Industrial Revolution. It happened in the 20s and in the 40s, coming out of the recession. It happened. But there's a sense in which the new heroes of our culture are people who started something, who did something new and original and fresh. And there's a real sense in which, a real question, what does it mean for us as a Christian community to start something new, especially when you've inherited something very, very old? Hence the very clever term, fresh expressions, which is how we do new things. But how do we do new things? And who are and I think for my money, the question is, how do our churches honour and encourage and empower those amongst us who want to do something new? What happens when somebody says, I've got a vision and a dream? Do we pour cold water on it and say, don't be silly, get a job? Or do we find ways of encouraging people to pursue those things, to follow their dreams, to create the new? And there's a real question around about what it means for us to have an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurial, by the way, doesn't mean making money. Entrepreneurial is from the French word entreprendre, with that at the end. which simply means to undertake something. What we're actually talking about is a generation of undertakers. So that's good. So the brethren will be right in there, aren't they? But it just means to undertake something, to do stuff, to make stuff happen, to start stuff. And there's a real possibility in our culture of starting new things. Let me tell you one little story about one guy that did this in the States, who started a thing called Charity Water, and which is a thing where they go and drill wells in Africa. And he's a guy that was part of the kind of party scene in America, and he wanted to do something useful with his life. He had a Christian background. He kind of came back to faith and wanted to do something, so he started this program where he basically holds these huge parties in New York, and everybody buys a bottle of water, and then he takes it for $20, and he takes the money, and he goes over to Africa, and he drills wells. He's raised $10 million in the last 3 years through this, and hundreds of people who aren't Christians are supporting him in it, because they love the idea of just doing something, just getting out there and do something. And he's really into direct action, so he'll say to you, I want you to pay me $20 for this bottle of water. I'm going to take the money and go and drill a well. And if you give my team your email address, in 6 weeks we will email you the Google Earth coordinates so you can see the well. So you can go online and see the well that your money... Now, what's really interesting about that is in Africa that's actually a real problem. Because what's happening in Africa, and this is not a criticism, what's happening in Africa is because independent projects are coming in and drilling wells, the governments of these countries who are responsible for trying to provide water for everyone can't, because they can't manage the water table, the water supply, because it's just being messed around. But the problem is nobody cares, because he's just saying, look, the people in this village didn't have water last week, and now they do, and people respond to that idea of direct action. So there's a movement in our culture towards taking action, starting the new, doing the fresh, and mobilising people to take action. So, what does a church that is sustainable and social, choral, conversational, aesthetic, entrepreneurial look like? What kind of a community does that look like? What kind of opportunities does that give people to belong? What kind of shape of culture do these words tend to produce? I think that's what we're going to go on and talk about a bit. But I'm going to do a poem first, Dan, is that right, mate? So here's a little poem that kind of, for me, sets this in a context, I guess, of that there is a sense in which none of this means anything unless each of us is finding a relationship with God, finding how we fit into this big story of God. So this is called You Catch My Eye. You catch my eye in the eye of the storm. You hold ointment appointments when hell's hornets swarm. When I find no time for stillness, you tell me there's still time. When my words are clashing cymbals, you are reason, rhythm, rhyme. You are the song that rises in my soul, the coin that clatters in my begging bowl. You're a bed of roses on a crowded street, a peppermint balm for my blistered feet. You are rich in rest when rest is radium rare. By cool pools you position me, with passion you petition me. In fog and smog you recondition my air. You are the unexpected cheer that lifts my game. In the vinegar and lemon juice of life, you are champagne. Like honey on the throat to Frank Sinatra, like a goat's milk bath to Cleopatra, you surround me to astound me, you soothe and smooth. You are the stalker who is good for me, the jailer who can set me free, the trap and snare to bind me into love. Come, you who have refined me, come find me, mind me, and bind me, gentle jailer, into love. Amen. My prayer for you guys is that each of you would know what it is, that you have a place in God's story, that you would know that the Creator who dreamed of you before a single shred of the earth had been made has a place for you in his world, has ways of making your story meaningful, and wants to release you into making the stories of others meaningful. May you know that God is with you, that he loves you, that he speaks into your life. Amen. Amen.
Thank you very much, Gerard. You've given us a lot to digest. It would have been so easy for us tonight to hear Gerard speak, had some questions, and then just gone home,
Okay.
which seems countering everything that we're talking about tonight. So tonight we've scheduled in, we're going to have about a half-hour break actually now, and we're going to bring out some snacks and stuff around. It'll give you the opportunity to maybe chat amongst yourselves about stuff that Gerard's been talking about, questions you may want to pose to him, is that right? Pose is more better.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Just to let you know, all around the tables, you should see lots of Bless leaflets, flyers. This one in particular, if you want to know what Bless is all about, this is a great flyer which I think they've recently made. If you want to know more about the work of Bless, Gemma is here in the corner next to this stand of stuff in a suitcase. It's a beautiful suitcase. She can sell you books, she can sell you
Teddy bears?
Cornish biscuits?
No,
she
not
can't.
for sale.
They're not for sale. They're just there to look pretty. So yeah, please buy some tea, coffee. There'll be stuff going around. Also, if you want to pose a question via Twitter, for you young people, we're engaging with you guys. If you are older and you're on Twitter, then you can use the hashtag Canopy Swansea, and hopefully we'll get them on the screen. You can tweet it as well if you want. And if you don't want to ask the question to Gerard later, you can bring your question to the front and I can ask it for you.
And this is, by the way, these words and this stuff is just an attempt to stimulate conversation, so no question is considered out of bounds. Do ask anything.
Thank you. So, do you want to say something?
Yeah.
Gemma's going to say something.
Gemma!
We also have, Bless has a monthly email that we send out to people, and it's got creative prayer resources on it, monthly recipes from Bethany. What else do we have? Interviews.
Essays by Dan.
Last month.
Pardon?
The last essay was Dan.
Oh yeah. So it's really wicked. Some months are better than others. So I've got a piece of paper here, and if you just want to write your name and your email, then we'll just add you to that list. So.
Sweet. Enjoy. So we'll be back soon.
Right.